You know what you're listening to?
Is that a trick question?
It's the I Still Love This Game podcast with your host, Matthew Damian.
He's an idiot. Don't listen to this. He's an idiot.
Hello and welcome to the I Still Love This Game podcast. And before I get into the show and the topics, and there's a lot, and the reason there's a lot is because I've been away for a couple of weeks. I'm sorry, I haven't had much of an opportunity to sit down and gather my thoughts and record. As you guys know, this is not a pre-scripted show. There's not a lot of editing. I will just go into these topics pretty much off the top of my head, unless if it's a major topic. So in today's show, there's a lot to talk about. Obviously, the National Championship, the Final Four played out. I want to talk about that. The NBA playoffs are amongst us, and I haven't been in the loop the last month because college basketball is fantastic, and especially when we're talking about the tournament. The thing I want to talk about off the very top is the Hall of Fame, and the Hall of Fame is dead to me right now, and I hate saying that because we've seen so many great inductions, so many great selections over the years. But I'm a man of my word. When I had Ben Wallace on the show, and I wasn't just appeasing to Ben Wallace, I said to him, if he does not get in, I am boycotting it. And I am absolutely boycotting the Hall of Fame. The Hall of Fame is an absolute joke right now. The Basketball Hall of Fame is ridiculous. It's even worse than the Baseball Hall of Fame because you got, they've got a lot of steroid era players. I should excuse myself there because a lot of those players that aren't getting in there's no concrete evidence that they were actually using steroids. I'm thinking of Barry Bonds, of course. I mean, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence, but there's no actual evidence. There's no positive test results, and there's no testimonies from his trainer saying that he's done it. In fact, his trainer is in jail for him because he refuses to testify against him. What does that tell you? Potentially he's actually innocent, despite what everybody wants to believe. And of course, Pete Rose is not in the Hall of Fame either, and that has to do with gambling. So at least there's some kind of justification for these players not getting in. The Basketball Hall of Fame is so ridiculous, and why I am pissed off at this. It's not just Ben Wallace, by the way. It's also Chris Webber. He deserved to get in too. Why I am pissed off at this is the justification that's thrown out there for Vlade fucking Divac getting in over those two. Ben Wallace, they built a championship team around this guy that should have been back-to-back titles, right? Let's not forget that. They built a championship team out of nothing. That team was dead in the water after Grant Hill wanted to go. He was a sign and trade. They were able to get Ben Wallace in that sign and trade deal. Nobody expected anything out of that Pistons team. Not with Jerry Stackhouse and Chucky Atkins, and I believe Joe Smith was on that team too. Nobody expected a damn thing out of that team. And yet they were competitive. That was in 2001? Within 3 years of that, with Ben Wallace as a catalyst, they won an NBA championship. They went through one of the toughest roads for an Eastern Conference team to win the title. They went through the back-to-back defending Eastern Conference champions in a 7-game war. That was the New Jersey Nets led by Jason Kidd. They had dropped Game 5. They were down 3-2. They had to win Game 6 in New Jersey. They did that, and then they won Game 7. That is not an easy task. Then they went up against 61 win, Indiana Pacers with Jermaine O'Neal, who was a legitimate MVP candidate. And some of the toughest basketball you'll ever see. We saw 71-69 results. You can quote me. Don't quote me on that. Excuse me, because those games though were ridiculously close. We saw records for shots being blocked, records for rebounding. Every possession counted. It was great. It was hard-nosed basketball, and the Pistons came out on top of that. And you want validation? They went up against a team with 4 Hall of Famers. 4 of them. Yeah, okay. Karl Malone wasn't in his prime. Gary Payton was in his prime. Guess what? Not every single player that was on those Detroit Piston teams were in their prime either. Rasheed Wallace wasn't in his prime. Tayshaun Prince was not in his prime. You could say Chauncey Billups, yeah. Rip Hamilton, yeah. Ben Wallace, yeah. But what about their bench players? They weren't in their prime either. Very rarely will you see a team with everybody, top to bottom, with their players in their prime. So that doesn't count as an excuse. They still had Shaq, they still had Kobe, they had won 3 of the last 4 titles, they had won a three-peat, and to use the excuse that they weren't in their prime, or to use the excuse that Shaq and Kobe were imploding, do you know why they were imploding? That Detroit Pistons defense. Do you know who the integral part of that defense was? Ben fucking Wallace. I mean, I'm sorry for cursing twice, but my goodness. What does this guy have to do to get into the Hall of Fame? What has he done wrong? You know, what? And you want to say international appeal or what Vlade Divac has done internationally? Okay, let's talk about international. Where do you think I'm from? Do you think I'm from America? Oh, I'm not from America. Who do you think had a bigger impact on my growing up and learning about the game of basketball? Do you think it was Ben Wallace or do you think it was Vlade Divac? So tell me about international reach again. How about this? Why is it that international reach is such an important thing right now? I mean, it's always been semi-important. I mean, we've talked about it, but with Yao Ming, I can sort of get it. But Vlade, what has Vlade really done internationally? I mean, he was part of a team with Drazen Petrovic and Tony Kukoc. I think Dino Raja was on that team as well. That was the old Yugoslavian team. But what did they really accomplish? Did they win a gold medal? No. He's not a Manu Ginobili. He never won an NBA championship either. And we'll get to that in a minute when I'm talking about Chris Webber. But the fact remains, if it's just because he's international, then what happens when Peja Stojakovic is going up to the Hall of Fame? Are we going to bump out Paul Pierce so Peja gets in? I mean, come on. Seriously, come on. This is unbelievable. Vlade over Ben Wallace? And I've got nothing against Vlade Divac, but what do we know Ben Wallace for? Playing the game the right way. We're talking about international appeal and all this other stuff, right? We're talking about adding to the context. All right. What is Vlade known as? He was known as a flopper. He's known as really the first real flopper in NBA history. I mean, you can make an argument for Bill Laimbeer too, right? But Vlade made it famous, especially up against Shaq. What did Ben Wallace do against Shaq? He threw Shaq around. Remember the blocks that he had on him? It wasn't just the one when Shaq was in Miami as well. Ben Wallace actually defended Shaq like a man. Whereas Vlade Divac was flailing himself all over the baseline and all over the court to try and get cheap foul calls. And they put him in over Ben Wallace? This is unbelievable. And whilst I'm on it, while we're talking about the Sacramento Kings, yeah, they probably did get hosed in 2002. Game 6 was an absolute travesty, especially in the fourth quarter of the 2002 conference finals. I'll give you that. But you know who the most important player by far was on that Sacramento Kings team? It wasn't Vlade. It was Chris Webber. Chris Webber was overlooked for Vlade Divac. My God. My God. Oh, who comes up with this stuff? I mean, who is actually voting this in? I would like to know. Because this is bullshit. This is insanity. The people who made this decision, they should all be kicked. They should all be banned from the Hall of Fame. They should be banned from any rational basketball discussion ever. This is one of the worst decisions I've ever seen. Not just Ben Wallace, but also Chris Webber. This is... I don't know where to go with this. I don't know what to say with this, apart from the fact that I will be boycotting the Hall of Fame. And if they do a makeup call next year and put in Ben Wallace and put in Chris Webber, I don't know what it means at that point. Because in their minds, they really think Vlade is more important to the game of basketball, the growth of the game of basketball, the integrity of the game of basketball, than Ben Wallace and Chris Webber. Chris Webber was runner-up for the regular season MVP in 2001, trailing only Allen Iverson. Chris Webber had a hell of a career. Chris Webber was a fantastic player. And yet he can't get in the Hall of Fame and Vlade can? Oh my goodness. Can you imagine the outcry if Jason Terry got in the Hall of Fame prior to Oh, I mean, he probably... no, he won't, actually. I highly doubt he's a first ballot. But let's imagine, right, Jason Terry is in the same class, the same finalists as Dirk Nowitzki. Just let's imagine this for a second. We're reversing the roles here. And let's imagine that Jason Terry gets in over Dirk Nowitzki. People would be outraged at that. They would be absolutely outraged at that. That is just as bad and just as egregious as what we have seen here with Vladi getting in over Chris Webber. And that's not even the worst of it. He got in over Ben Wallace. Are you serious? Are you serious? My God. My God. The only thing that's positive about all of this is now the 91 Bulls. They beat a team that had 3 Hall of Fame players in the NBA Finals. Vladi, James Worthy, and of course Magic Johnson. Isn't that insane? Isn't that insane? The 91 Lakers had the same amount of Hall of Famers as I believe the 87 Lakers did with Kareem. Oh my goodness. Vladi Divac is in the Hall of Fame. Ben Wallace isn't. Oh, have mercy. So yeah, we're gonna... Well, I don't know what you guys are going to do, but I am going to boycott the Hall of Fame, maybe for the rest of its existence. I won't even go there now. You know, man, this would never happen because they wouldn't have the balls to do it, but I would love for some of those voters that voted for Vladi over those two. Come on the podcast, defend yourself. I'm not going to edit it. We'll do it live. How about that? But come on the podcast. Let's hear it. Let's see if your argument stands up to my argument. Because I can't see any justification for this one. But let's move along before I get too annoyed. And let's talk about the NBA playoffs. And they're about to begin, and I will plead ignorance with some of these matchups because I have not been paying attention the last 2.5 weeks. Because, as I said, the tournament has been on, and I will talk about the Final Four and the championship game in a moment. But this is what we've got. We've got the Warriors who came, they were sitting in second place pretty much all season. They've come storming in and they're the number 1 seed in the West, but not in the NBA overall. They're going to go up against the Los Angeles Clippers. That's an interesting matchup. And don't be surprised if the Clippers win 1 or 2 games. They are a scrappy bunch. Doc Rivers is a hell of a coach. What he has done here, and I said this last year, I said that might have been his best coaching season of all time. He's clearly superseded. This is his best coaching season. I know he's won an NBA title. I know he's went to the NBA Finals as a 4 seed. But what he's done with this group, players constantly traded. They pretty much clean house on him. They're rebuilding, and it didn't matter to him. He kept churning out results. If I wasn't holding a microphone right now, I would give him a standing ovation. In fact, let me put the microphone down and let me give him a standing ovation. Doc Rivers, I applaud you because the NBA right now needs more of that. Not this tanking nonsense, which clearly the Clippers were trying to do, but instead, he went out for it. He went for it. He tried to get victories, and in the long run, it's done his franchise a great service. I know they're going to lose their first-round pick now because they made the playoffs. So that that first-round pick was conditional on them missing the playoffs. If they had missed the playoffs, they would have kept it. They made it. Obviously, they have to forfeit. I can't remember which team gets it. It's irrelevant. The Clippers don't get it. But in the long run, he may have done them the greatest service possible because they have so much cap room. And if you are a free agent and you want to win, as well as getting a big market like the Los Angeles market is, what an attractive option. It's much more attractive than that shit show down also playing Staples with the Lakers. And I've got to get to that as well. This show's going to be packed. I don't think you will have heard a show with me laughing more. I'm so tempted to get into the LeBron and Magic Johnson thing right now. I'm already laughing, but we'll have to wait for it. Getting back to the first round matchup, though, the Warriors will win that. I know they'll win that, but the Clippers will give them a good fight. And they are very competitive, and I love the fact that they made the playoffs. I'm very happy they made the playoffs. We are going to stick, with the Western Conference. And Denver versus San Antonio. This is also a very interesting matchup. But I give the Spurs a great chance at winning this. Because the Nuggets, I am not sold on them. I'm sorry, I'm not sold on them. I haven't really seen them in the playoffs. Nobody has seen this group in the playoffs. Where is their playoff experience? Is it Paul Millsap? I guess. Isaiah Thomas, he's, yeah, okay, sure. But that's not enough for me. And San Antonio is full of playoff experience. From the coach to LaMarcus Aldridge to DeRozan to their bench players. They have so much playoff experience, it's not funny. Plus, and I haven't looked at the standings in quite some time, but last time I did check it, the Spurs had the best home record in the NBA. So that's a hell of a lot of pressure to put on the Nuggets throughout this series. If they drop one of those home games, whether it's the first two or even if it's game 5, or obviously if it's game 7 they lose the series, but if it's to hold serve with that up against that kind of experience, when you have that kind of inexperience, that's a hell of a lot of pressure to put on the team. So I'm going to do it. I'm going to say the Spurs are going to beat the Nuggets in the first round. And it's a coin flip, but I'm not going to punk out on this. I think the Spurs will knock them off. And it comes just down to experience, and it comes down to the fact that the Spurs are so lethal at home. Now watch them go out and get swept. Let's stay once again in the West, and we're going to go with Portland versus Oklahoma City. These games are always exciting between these two teams. And Westbrook has not had the best season. Did he average another triple-double? I'm not sure if he did or not. It's kind of lost value because he's done it so many times. Prior to him doing it, 3 years ago when Durant left, we had only seen one player ever do it once, and that was Oscar Robertson. And people consider that one of the greatest single-season statistics of all time. But to put it in perspective, it's kind of like a player averaging 50 points per game for three straight seasons, which Wilt did once and nobody has done since. So, I mean, I'm not sure if he averaged it. I'm pretty sure he did. I could look it up, but I'm not going to. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong. As I said before, I don't do a whole lot of editing on this show anymore. It's not because I don't care. It's 9:30 at night. I want this show going out tomorrow morning. I don't want to be stopping and starting it. And plus, you guys seem to like the flow. So getting back to the series though, Portland versus Oklahoma, Damian Lillard up against Russell Westbrook, Paul George. You've got all that. You've got Nurkic, who's out. That's big. That is so big because he was a guy that can create offense for the Blazers, but outside of Lillard and McCollum. Now, okay, you've got Enes Kanter, who can get you offensive rebounds, occasionally score, but he doesn't necessarily create offense. And so that's a big loss. I've got to go with Oklahoma winning that series. And, if my predictions come true, that means Oklahoma will actually have, despite being the 6th seed, they will have home court advantage in the second round. This is why the NBA needs to do reseeding, by the way, because in an ideal situation, if the Spurs are able to go through, then that really benefits Oklahoma for finishing 6th. So that's not really fair to the 4-5 team or the winner of that series, because they're going to have to go up against Golden State, despite having better records than both Oklahoma and San Antonio. So if it was fair, we would see a reseeding in that situation, and the winner of the Houston versus Utah, which I think Houston will win, by the way. So in this hypothetical, Houston would now become the number 2 seed, and they would drop down and play Oklahoma in the second round, as opposed to playing Golden State in the second round. That's why I'm saying it's grossly unfair, because they've actually got better records and they finish with a higher seed, but yet they get punished in the second round, or they're at a disadvantage in the second round, as opposed to Oklahoma and San Antonio, who have much easier matchups up against themselves instead of playing up against the Golden State Warriors. But Houston versus Utah, this is a difficult one for me, because Utah's playing very well. They're a very balanced team. But man, oh man, Houston is rolling. They have been rolling ever since they got rid of Carmelo Anthony. And maybe not so much from a record-wise. When Carmelo left, then Chris Paul was injured, Capella was injured. But James Harden should be the MVP. He probably won't, but he should be the MVP. And I just love the way they're playing. In fact, I'm not just predicting them to beat Utah. I'm actually predicting them to go ahead and take out Golden State. And the reason I'm saying that is last season, Golden State was pushed to 7 games up against this Houston team. Now, this Houston team is even more desperate than what they were last year. This is a second chance that nobody really gave them, especially the way they started the season. They've added Kenneth Faried. They've gone through some tribulations. They've had to fight their way to the 4 seed. They weren't, the favorites all season long. They didn't win 65 games. They couldn't just ease their way into the playoffs. And if they get through Utah, they will be toughened up. They will have proven themselves. And they have a formula that can beat Golden State. As I said, they were up 3-2 in the conference finals before Chris Paul got injured. Chris Paul doesn't get injured. I don't care what anybody says. I don't care what excuses are given. Chris Paul doesn't get injured. They win at least one of those games. Therefore, they game 6 or game 7, and therefore they go on to claiming the NBA title. I know that's just an opinion, but I am convinced of it. And this is their second chance, their second opportunity. Golden State, on the other hand, do they get fatigued? At some point, do they wear down? I think this is perfect. A perfect situation for Houston to take them out. So I may as well stick with the second round matchups in Oklahoma versus San Antonio. And I hope it happens. I really, really hope it happens because I keep thinking back to the, a double overtime game? And really got me going in the NBA. Because prior to that, I was bored senseless with some of the stuff I was seeing. And then I saw that game, that double overtime thriller. It was in San Antonio. There was some horrible calls up against Oklahoma. But I remember that game like it was yesterday. It was a fantastic game. I did an entire podcast pretty much on it because I was sick of talking negatively about the NBA, but I had to be honest. The product stunk at that stage. So I'm very, very happy that this is a potential matchup. And you might think 6 versus 7, that's a potential matchup. Well, look at the matchups. Look at who they have to go through to get there. Portland is missing their their third best offensive player. And as sometimes you can get away with that. Don't get me wrong. But when you have a team that's built around offense, not built around defense, but it's so heavily reliant on your top 3 players, that's such a big thing that you're missing out on. I don't think they can overcome that. Especially not up against a good defensive team, especially in the playoffs, like Oklahoma is. So getting back to the predictions, look, LaMarcus Aldridge, he could go for 35 in this series. Not just in one game, I'm talking about averages. There's not a whole lot that Oklahoma can throw at him to slow him down. So I like Oklahoma's chances, and I would pick Oklahoma to win that series, but it would be tough. It would be tough. San Antonio, we could be seeing the last game's Popovich coaching as well, because him getting this team to the second round, that's a pretty good accomplishment. And he may be looking at it realistically and thinking, well, I can't really take him any further, unless if you get someone like Kevin Durant in the offseason. So that's the reality of it. And then Oklahoma versus Houston in the conference finals. Look, if it happens that way, I'm a genius. It's kind of crazy when you think about that, but I would love to see that because we've seen some classics between these two teams too. And I'm thinking back to that game where Paul George carried his team and Dennis Schroeder carried the team when they were down by double digits. Russell Westbrook was having a horrible game, and I said, hey, might be time to rest Westbrook a little bit. That's a tongue twister and a half. And obviously they didn't, but that was just an idea. But I remember that game too. So if that happens, we'll be in for a treat there as well. But let's move over to the Eastern Conference. We got Milwaukee versus Detroit. I will be attending some of those Pistons games. That will be fun. But they don't stand a chance. The best case scenario is they're able to get one game. Milwaukee's just too complete. They've lost in the first round far too many times. They are not going to let this opportunity slip. Detroit has looked terrible over the last month. They should really be, realistically, they should be the 6th seed. And they scraped in to the playoffs, and I don't think I don't think there's no real point in them being in the playoffs. This is the sad thing about the NBA and the way it's structured. I would much rather Sacramento being there. But, for the first time in a long time, that's really the only grievance, that one. It's Sacramento not making it and Detroit making it. In previous years, we've had about 4 or 5 teams from the East that shouldn't have made it and 4 or 5 teams from the West that should have. But yeah, I'm going to go with Milwaukee in a sweep, but I'm not going to be surprised if it goes to 5 games. Excuse me. Number 2 is Toronto, and they're going up against Orlando. Kudos to Orlando. They've seemed to be in the process / tank mode for the last decade, ever since they got rid of Dwight Howard. And they've made the playoffs. They're going to snuck in, but they're going to get killed. They're going to get crushed by the Raptors. Raptors are not mucking around. In the last episode, I mentioned that this is the potential, and it turned out to be true. This is the potential of seeing the top 2 records in the NBA coming from the Eastern Conference. And I cannot remember the last time that has happened. Even with Jordan's Bulls, the team out in the West was always winning games too. So, I mean, we're talking about, what 30 years since we've seen something like this, where the top 2 teams, record-wise, have come from the Eastern Conference, and the Raptors are a part of that. So they're not going to muck around. I expect a sweep there as well. The Philadelphia 76ers versus Brooklyn, hey, that could potentially be a sweep as well. Brooklyn plays hard, though, so I would say, and given the inconsistency of Ben Simmons and some of the 76ers, I would say that Brooklyn at least gets 1 game. But, yep, I'm going to do it. It's a sweep again. And Boston versus Indiana. Boston has, maybe the most talented team, especially on the perimeter in the Eastern Conference, maybe the NBA. But the Pacers, without Oladipo, they don't really have a chance here. And they were valiant in their efforts to hold on to the 3 seed, which they actually were for a while, but then they'll drop down to the 4 seed. Now they're the 5 seed. They don't have a chance here. I'm sorry to say it. I like this team. They're gutsy. They're ballsy. But Boston is just far too talented. You've got a great coach in Brad Stevens. This is not going to end well for Indiana. And yes, it's funny how this works out. It really is. But, I've got... you compare this to the Western Conference, and you got upsets all over the place, but it is another sweep for Boston in my estimation. But then the good thing is we see the second round, and the second round should be unbelievable. Milwaukee versus Boston, a rematch, technically a rematch of last year's 7-game series in the first round. When I say technically, Kyrie Irving is back, Gordon Hayward is back. Budenholzer is there for as a coach for Milwaukee Bucks. There are also additional pieces for Milwaukee, such as Pau Gasol, for example. So technically, it's a rematch, but not really. Oh, it's a hard one to pick, though. I kind of wish I did notes now because I'm trying to weigh out. And the best test is if you gave me some money, who would I put the money on? It's difficult, man. I'm going to say Boston. And that means both number 1 seeds would have been knocked out in the second round by the 4 seed. I'm not sure if that's ever happened in one playoff. I know there's been times where both number 1 seeds didn't make the conference finals. 94 it happened, but the Atlanta Hawks made it to the second round, whereas the Seattle Sonics, they did not make it to the second round because they were eliminated by Denver. Remember Dikembe Mutombo. So that comes to mind. So I can't think of another time where both number 1 seeds have made it to the second round, but both of them failed to make the conference finals. If you guys could point me out as to when that has happened, I'd appreciate that. If it has happened at all. But the reason I am going with Boston is there's just a little bit too much talent on the perimeter, and I'm concerned about what Giannis can do. Not necessarily. Let me rephrase. I'm concerned as to Giannis being able to carry this team in a 7-game series up against a talented team based off the potential inconsistencies that they have, they being Milwaukee, on the perimeter. And that is why I'm going to go with Boston. If Kyrie Irving is off, then you have other players who can step up. You have Brown, you have Tatum, you have Rozier, you have Marcus Smart, you have Marcus Morris, you have Al Horford. That is my point. These guys can all carry you to victories in individual games. If Giannis, if Giannis is struggling, then where does it go? Does it go to Middleton? Is he able to carry you? And if it's not Middleton, if he's only able to give you, let's say, 15 to 20 points, then where else do you go? Is it Bledsoe? We saw last year what the Celtics were able to do to Bledsoe. And maybe Bledsoe responds this playoff series. That's the great thing about it. We will see. We go to the southern part of the bracket. When I say the southern, it's the lower part. It's the southern part. You got Philly versus Toronto. That will be a hell of a series, especially when you consider that the Raptors brought in not Pau Gasol, but Marc Gasol, probably just in case this happened and they were to play Philly in the playoffs and they would have to deal with Embiid. Boy, this is gonna be a fun series if this takes place, and I can't see any reason why it won't take place, because what I will be looking at is, can Kawhi Leonard neutralize Joel Embiid? And now obviously he's not going to be guarding him straight up, but Kawhi Leonard, is he going to be able to come from the perimeter and provide enough help defense? I mean, the comparisons of Kawhi Leonard being the next Scottie Pippen, or especially on the defensive end. Offensively, he's probably a little bit better than what Pippen was, but defensively, he's always been compared to Scottie Pippen. Scottie Pippen was instrumental up against big men by coming from the perimeter or wherever he was guarding his man, whether it was Karl Malone, whether it was Patrick Ewing or Shaq or Alonzo Mourning or whoever it was. He was always a threat to get there quickly and deflect the ball and make passes difficult or take charges, and he made a big impact. We will see how great of a defender Kawhi Leonard is if he is able to do that with Joel Embiid. But he may have his hands full already trying to slow down Jimmy Butler, who can score, or Tobias Harris, who can score. This is going to be a great matchup because both these teams are loaded. And I think they are both disappointed with their results last season. Both were knocked out in the second round. So I'm looking forward to this a lot. And this may be, and I know it's a big call when you have Houston versus Golden State over in the Western Conference, but this may be the playoff matchup of the second round. But I will pick, I want to say Philadelphia. I desperately want to say Philadelphia. But I'm aware of how good Kawhi Leonard is. I'm still going to go with Philadelphia. And it's kind of a selfish pick because I really want to see Boston versus Philly once again. We saw it last year. We saw the intensity. We saw that. I want it again. I want it again so badly. And if it happens again, I would go with Philadelphia. Even though Boston has had their number in the regular season, I just look at what are their answers for Embiid in a 7-game series? We have seen it. Okay, we saw it last year. I think Embiid, that was his baptism by fire moment in the NBA playoffs. But what I am interested in seeing is, how does he respond to it? Does he come out with a vengeance? Does he tear up, Al Horford? Are we going to see... I mean, people are quick to compare him to Hakeem Olajuwon. I'm kind of repulsed by that comparison. But the fact remains, Hakeem tore up everybody. So if Joel Embiid is worthy of that comparison, he needs to prove it. And he's going to have to prove it by tearing up Al Horford and the Boston Celtics. It's possible. He's very good. I could see him doing it. So I'm going to go with Boston in that series. Philadelphia in that series. And we would have an NBA Finals matchup of Philadelphia. And I don't think I actually disclosed this before. But if it was Houston versus Oklahoma, I would go with Houston. So we would have Houston versus Philadelphia. And I would say Houston would win that series. So that's the NBA playoff preview from the first round all the way to the NBA Finals. And I fully expect to be roasted severely, as 80 to 90% of these are wrong. Now we go from basketball to I don't know. How would you describe the Los Angeles Lakers? Now, I said that once they missed the playoffs, that I would not talk about the Lakers until the offseason, unless something dramatic happened. Well, that something dramatic happened, and that's Magic Johnson resigning. What an odd situation, and he didn't even tell Jeannie Buss about it. So here's what could have happened. I don't like to speculate, but we have to speculate because we don't know what really happened. So what else can we do? This is what I think happened, right? I think Magic wanted Luke Walton gone. Jeannie Buss said no. Magic couldn't handle that, but he respects her so much that he also realized that he couldn't be in a situation where he felt like he wasn't fully empowered. And, you think about it, Magic is filthy rich. He is incredibly rich. He's done so well with his money. And I don't think he likes the pressure that he is under, the spotlight he is under. I think he loves the Lakers, but that is obvious. But when I look at Magic, I think he doesn't love his job. And I think he wants to be more of an ambassador, not just to the Lakers, but of the NBA, and he can't help out guys like Ben Simmons without it becoming a major storyline. And I don't think he likes the fact that he is being blamed now by all these LeBron worshippers out there for the struggles, because it's never LeBron's fault. So it's got to be someone else. So Magic, Bill Walton, Jeannie Buss, all the other Laker players, the Laker fan base, everybody, Kobe Bryant, it's everyone else's fault but LeBron's, according to the LeBron worshippers. So I think Magic cracked. And I think he realized this isn't worth it to him, not from a financial standpoint. And what was the benefits that he was getting? Not much. So he decided to walk away. I get it. I understand that. But seriously, at what point do we realize that this is the biggest train wreck in the history of the NBA? Think about all the positives that we were spun and we were told prior to LeBron going to Los Angeles. When he arrived. Sorry, prior to them playing games. So once he arrived, so the moment that he signed until they started playing games. Could it have gone any worse? If you were a free agent, why would you even consider going there at this point? I called it. I said it was going to be a train wreck. I said it was going to be a disaster, but I did not think it would have happened this quickly or this badly. This is unbelievable. Magic retires. Luke Walton still may not keep his job. If they go ahead and fire Walton as well, then it wasn't a situation or a clash between Magic and Jeannie Buss over the coaching position. And if that's the case, then it comes down to LeBron. LeBron has... people called Terrell Owens a locker room cancer. Because he just got in there and he infected it and it was no good. It doesn't matter how well he played. It just wasn't worth it. The payoff wasn't worth it. And the same, I think, can be said and applied for LeBron James. He doesn't play any defense. The team's worse. He fractured this team big time with that whole Anthony Davis situation. The young players, they do not like him. They do not trust him, and rightly so. The coaches cannot coach him because he refuses to be coached. It's time for him to retire. It's really time for him to retire. He's overstayed. I know people are going to think that, you're crazy, but hey, when you think about it, what is left for him? Unless if the Lakers trade him, what is left for him? They're going to wait, Anthony Davis, they're going to have to wait another year before they actually bring in some help? That's what they're waiting on, and even then that's not enough because the young players, they don't want to be there anymore. They hate playing there. Other free agents aren't interested. I mean, if they can somehow get Kyrie Irving as well as Anthony Davis, then maybe it could work. But those are some big ifs, and once again, they'd have to wait until the end of next season because Anthony Davis is not going to be traded there. They might be able to bring in Kyrie Irving, but I'm not sure if Kyrie Irving even wants to go there. The whole phone call in the middle of the season, yeah, that looks suspicious. But at the same time, Kyrie Irving has already walked away from LeBron once. Would he walk into a worse situation? Because this is actually it's a more hostile situation than Cleveland. Because at least in Cleveland, you were playing in the Eastern Conference when it was very weak. You had a coach, and you also had a fan base that was willing to put up with this stuff. The Laker fan base is not, so there's just drama everywhere. That's not a good look, man. And it always comes down to LeBron. He has destroyed 4 or 5 years of rebuilding. And that rebuilding process really started when Kobe busted his Achilles. Even when Kobe came back for a few years after that, he was never the same. And the Lakers knew that. I mean, they overpaid him, and they kind of overpaid him because it was, a thank you to him, which he deserved. But they knew what they were doing with that. They were rebuilding. And the fact that, you see D'Angelo Russell doing so well, and I'm so happy for him too, because I don't think he did anything wrong to be shipped out. You want to talk about the Nick Young thing or whatever. Nick Young was the one cheating on his girlfriend / fiance. It wasn't Russell. It wasn't him doing that. But yet he copped all that blame. And yet he was essentially traded for that. And also to bring in Lonzo Ball. What a situation, man. What a situation. And I feel sorry for the Laker fans. But my goodness, I do not feel sorry for LeBron. And honestly, it's time for him to really consider retiring. Unless if the Lakers can trade him. But if you're a franchise, would you trade for him? If you're a team that's actually contending, why would you do that? What benefits do you have there? Would you seriously run the risk of letting LeBron do to your team what he has just done to the Lakers? I don't know if you'd do it or not. I wouldn't, and I don't know if they would though. So guys, 43 minutes in the books. I've been pretty much talking non-stop. I will be more frequent with these uploads and episodes as the playoffs advance. I'm not sure if I'm going to do anything as crazy as what I did last year with an episode a day for, a month. I'm not sure if I'm going to do that. I'll try my darndest though. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode. I'm sorry about the lack of episodes and content. That will change. But thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time.